Mrs. Trimmie, President White,
Here.
and Chairman McMillan is out of town this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Kathy.
You're welcome.
Number 2, consideration approving sale and purchase of property
Move on
agreements
to
for the
second.
North Perkins Ferry Road Bridge Replacement Project in Ward 1. Have a motion by Mr. White and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Number 3, consideration of approving a temporary servitude agreement for the Carlos Drive widening project in Ward 4. I have a motion by
So moved.
Mr. Bears.
Second.
And a second by Mr. White. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Number 4, consideration of approving active sale agreements for the Niblets Bluff Road
So
Bridge
moved.
Replacement and Realignment Project in Ward 7. I have a motion by Mr. Bears and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Number 5, consideration of approving an amendment to the professional engineering contract to include construction
Second.
material testing and additional services related to the water system improvements and expansion project Phase 1. Have a motion by Mr. Entrepont, a second by Mr. Abshire. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Number 6, consideration of authorizing the parish
on six.
engineer to
Second.
advertise for Calcasieu Parish Project Number 19-203-003, Ham Reed Road Extension Project, Phase 1. I have a motion by Mr. Brain and a second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Number 7, consideration of accepting
Move on
Calcasieu
seven.
Parish
Second.
Project Number 2018-3, overlaying of various roads, Wards 1 and 6, as substantially complete. Have a motion by Mr. White and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Any other matters for
Move to
consideration?
adjourn. Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. He's here?
I don't have any appointments. I'm gonna leave.
Almost figured it out. I've almost, but I'll worry about it.
The purpose of today's committee meeting is to formulate an agenda for the regular meeting of the police jury on July 2nd, 2019. I need a motion and a second to pull item number 20.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Brain and a second by Mr. Abshire. Item number 20, take appropriate actions on the terms of the following members of various boards and districts. A, Workforce Development Board, Ms. Tracy Fontenot.
I'd like to defer for 30 days.
I have a motion by Mr. Shalen to defer for 30 days, and a second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that item will pass. Number 2, Mr. Keith Cooley.
No, B.
Miss Carol Thibodeau.
B, Ms. Carol, want to go too quick?
Appoint Ms.
Ms. Carol
Karen Barrett.
Thibodeau? Who is it?
Appoint Ms. Karen, Barrett.
Barrett. I have a motion by Mr. Latour to appoint Ms. Karen Barrett, and a second by Mr. Guillory. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that item will pass. Number 2,
I'd like to defer for 30
Mr.
days.
Keith Cooley.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Latour to defer for 30 days, and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that item will pass. number through, Mr. Pascal Malone. Did I pronounce that right?
Pascal.
We'd like to appoint Mr. Joel McSpadden.
I have a motion by Mr. Latour to appoint Ms. Joel McFadden,
Second.
and a second by President White. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that item will pass. Moving on to item B, Burton Coliseum Advisory
Move to
Council.
appoint Mr. Jimmy Moe.
Second.
I have a motion by President White to appoint Mr. Jimmy Moe, and a second by Mr. Latour. B, Ms. Bridget Morton.
Move to reappoint Ms.
Second.
Bridget
I
Moore.
have a motion
Second.
by President White to appoint Ms. Bridget Morton, and a second by Mr. Guillory. Any discussion? Any objection? That item will pass. Number 3, Mr. Braylon
Move to
Harris.
reappoint Mr. Harris.
I have a motion by President White to appoint Mr. Harris, and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? That item will pass. Moving on to C, Calcasieu Parish Planning and Zoning Board. Ms. Janelle Hyatt.
So moved.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderpont, are you aware of if this young lady would like to serve again, or
No,
I haven't
not,
heard
but
anything?
I don't know who she is, and I don't have a problem with her, so we can do that. I don't even know who represented, I mean,
It says she's at large from West Calcasieu. Are you
Oh, is
familiar with the appointment, Mr. Barris?
Quincy, I think.
I mean,
Somebody must know.
let's just leave it on there till next week.
think
and,
Sandy's familiar with her, but Sandy's absent.
Yeah. But
Well,
if
between
Sandy-
now and next week, I'm gonna do what me and Mr. Scott should have done a month ago. We'll verify that she does
Okay.
wish to continue to serve.
Okay. All right.
Well, I'm glad somebody from East Lake Charles is looking out for us.
Hey, I'm just here to make you guys happy,
East,
man, that's all.
East Calcasieu.
All right, then.
Make me look good.
To next meeting.
Motion is to move to next meeting to have discussion on it. Item D, Community Center and Playground District Number 1 of Ward 6. Mr. Johnny D. Grove. Mr., oh,
I would
Move to
move,
reappoint.
yeah, that's who she recommends. I second
okay, I have a
that.
motion by Mr. Andrew Point to reappoint Mr. Johnny D. Grove, and a second by Mr. Abshire. Any discussion? Any objection? That motion will carry.
Closest thing to a proxy
E,
vote.
Community Center and Playground District Number 2 of Ward 4. Mr. Andrew Point.
Move to
Mr. Doug
reappoint-
Como.
Move to reappoint Mr. Doug Como.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Andrew Point to appoint Mr. Doug Como, and I have a second by Mr. Barris. Any discussion? Any objection? That item will carry. F, Community Center and Playground District Number 3 of Ward 7. Mr. Barris, I have Ms. Crystal Eastwood.
Move to reappoint Miss Crystal Eastwood.
I have a motion by Mr. Barris to appoint Ms. Crystal Eastwood, and a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? That item will carry. G, Community Center and Playground
to
District
defer
Number
till next
4
meeting.
of Ward 1. I have a motion by President White to defer Ms. Connie Huffpower until next meeting. And I have a second by Mr. Barris.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objection?
They're on vacation, Mr.
That item will carry.
I don't know if you meant what next. Never mind.
Would that be kin to the gentleman that won the city championship this past week, Mr. Dane? Huff Power? Wasn't there Huff Power that won the city championship this past week? Yeah, yeah.
For the fourth time.
Okay. Great job on his part. Item H, Community Center and Playground District Number 5 of Ward 5. Mr. Kenny Ashworth.
Just move to reappoint.
I have a motion by Mr. Landry to appoint Mr. Kenneth Ashworth, and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? We do have discussion.
Just real quick, just
Go
before we
ahead,
get too
Mr.
far from
Barris.
G, before we get too far from G, just want to remind everybody that Sound Off Live is on Mondays. We talk sports on Mondays.
President White, can I have your permission?
After the meeting.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Mr. Barris. Moving on to item I, Community Center and Playground District Number 7
I'd like
of
to move to
Ward 2.
reappoint Mr.
Ms.
Jason
Latour.
Leonard.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Latour to reappoint Mr. Jason Leonard, and a second by Mr. Landry. Any discussion? Any objection? That item will carry. J, West Calcasieu
Move to
Airport
reappoint Mr.
Authority.
Dalton Langford.
Mr. Andrew Point. I have a motion by Mr. Andrew Point to reappoint Mr. Dalton Langford, and a second by Mr. Barris. Any discussion? Any objection?
Move to adjourn.
That item will carry. I have a motion by President White to adjourn. I have a motion and a second. We are now adjourned. Great meeting.
Excellent.
Barrett, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna.